Well, now, if I click this, it should be live. Marvellous. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Is everyone there? This is going to be tight. I'm not convinced we're going to finish the series this time round. It might be another episode we have to squeeze in, which we'll do so as a summary. I think we might finish the report, but we won't finish the overall summary and a reminder. Anyway, let's get on with it, shall we? Apologies, my voice is a bit weird. I'm still not 100%. I've got through all the whatever the illness was that I've had, but I also haven't done much talking today because I've been focusing on a submission. But I'm all right. Yeah, I feel fine. I feel absolutely fine for the most part. Just don't have much appetite. So, I've basically eaten very, very little since Sunday. Remarkably small amount since Sunday, actually, and it's now Wednesday, which is a bit strange. I'm sure I'll be absolutely fine for the filming that I'm doing tomorrow. Anyway, let's get on with it. So, what are we starting with? It's the COVID stats. The COVID stats, as ever, like to keep on top of these. Rail is just basically bouncing between 75 and 80%. We're very much just like cycling in that range now. So there's 75 and there's 80. We're kind of very much in that range. So there's 80 and 75. Just to annotate it for no reason with my scribbly handwriting. It's not COVID. No, I don't have COVID. So, cycling nicely bouncing back upwards, which is good. Road vehicle usage is doing some weird stuff. Not quite sure why it's doing that. We'll see how that normalizes. The data might get updated. The holiday, possibly. The Easter doesn't fall the same time every year, so that screws things up. Potentially, that's also why buses have been a bit weird. You can see buses being weird. Rail, you can see again, it's climbing up. It might exceed. In fact, in all likelihood, it will. So at the moment, we're sitting exactly at 80%. We might exceed. That means that we might exceed 80% when they update the figures. Anyway, so that's good. That's the COVID stats. Let's crack on to the news. Firstly, strike time. The RMT are planning to call. They're balloting 40,000 members to call what might end up being the biggest rail strike in modern history, which is fun. If you're in the RMT, vote in favour of the strike. Frankly, it's about time it's about time government realised that and people realised how much stuff is being squeezed under the radar in terms of service cuts and safety critical staff being cut. But also, it'd be nice if the TSSA got involved, and if ASLEF got involved. Basically, it'd be good if all of the transport unions, the rail unions, got involved in this one. I don't know what the law. Blair, Thatcher, and all of the sort of basically Thatcher and post-Thatcher prime ministers have smashed the unions. So, to what extent other unions are allowed to do stuff at the same time, I don't know how. I don't know. Other people can inform me, but it'd be nice if all the other unions came out in support. Frankly. I'm keen to strike. I'll do it. Anyway, so if you're in the RMT, make sure you get hold of that ballot and vote in favour. Anyway, so let's do this thing. Gareth Williams. I don't know actually if they'll send non-rail staff the vote. Presumably not, but not sure. Anyway, right. More new trains that don't fit. C2C, good for them. New trains. It's been a while, but they've got these new trains, lovely. But they're Aventras. They're Aventras, which means that the train has a footstep here, whereas the platform is of course built here. So this is here we are. This is if you've got the train. Here's a wheel. And you've got the running edge. There's the running edge. Why is it on the outside of the... anyway, you get the gist. This distance is... this is 9:15, or should be. And this distance up to here, so that's that distance there, 9:15. This distance up to the footstep is around about 1100. Which and that's about... the floor is even higher on the train. This is bad, folks. Why are we designing? Why are we still, when we know that we can have trains that have a footstep here? Why are we still procuring trains that have a footstep here? Well, we know why. It's because these trains are horribly delayed because the Bombardier reasons. So they only arriving now when they should have been arriving in the back end of 2020 or whatever it's supposed to be. In any case, they are here. So yes, yes, new train, but this is bad. Right, so that's not good. More new trains that don't fit. Right, this was fun. Man did no research and he got owned. Simon Parker, seems I don't know anything about him. I'd never heard of him until a couple of days ago. Yes, so but he published a piece. He wrote a little piece, pushing his book. And the way he thought to push a book and push a load of people to pay attention to his book was to write a controversial piece on HS2, inverted commas. As you can see, he's saying here a very controversial subject. Well, only controversial because, okay, there are two options here for this bad. This is a dreadful piece of nonsense saying somehow to scrap HS2 and build a cycle route all the way from the top of Scotland to the bottom to do Land's End John O'Groats, basically. This makes no sense on a number of levels, and I'm not even going to get into it. But oh my goodness me! There are in today's paper. I'm arguing that we should cancel supermarkets in favour of takeaway food. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Essentially, we should be striving to slow down rather than speed. All this standard bollocks. Now, either this man did no research and published this piece in good faith, sort of thinking that he understood the topic and published it and thought it was going to be a win with everyone, or he knew that this was a load of nonsense. He was picking on standard repeated sound bites to try and get a reaction. Actually, it's probably both. But in the latter case, this is interesting because it's quite clear then that was... look at this. Simon gauged opinion on HS2 while cycling around these miles around Britain. Fascinating. I can promise you that is just not even remotely reflective. In fact, I know it's not, because there's this thing called general elections which happen, which represent how people actually feel about it. Anyway, this piece is rubbish. It's a load of rubbish. So anyway, but what's funny is that rather than acknowledging that the piece is a load of rubbish, he then tweeted a very controversial subject. It's not controversial, mate. Literally everyone on Twitter who read the piece and saw the piece pointed out that you were speaking rubbish. So it got ratioed horribly. All of these are they're all quote tweets. These are all replies. It's got not many likes for a piece like this. And then likewise, like this tweet, this was then again like 25 people telling he's an idiot, 2 people quote tweeting, and then 70. It's just not. Anyway, it makes me angry. Talking of things that make me angry. Oh man, this was very frustrating. Talking of things that make me angry, the Labour Party here citing Fair Fuel UK, well-known right-wing reactionary nasties. Really not good. Just literally taking lines directly from Fair Fuel UK in their tweets. So, thanks to Neve. Let's break this down. Labour's urged ministers to get on with their jobs. So, where are we? Get on with their jobs and called for immediate nationwide injunctions. Blah, blah, blah. Cause misery for motorists. Highlighting data. This is the scary bit. Highlighting data from the campaign for fair fuel. Ministers need to sort it. Oh my goodness me. Labour's Steve Reid argued that ministers need to sort it out. Oh my goodness, it's just it's just really very frustrating to see Labour doing this sort of thing. This sort of thing, like just referring to Fair Fuel UK. Fair Fuel UK like lobby against LTNs. They lobby against public transport. They're nasties. They're nasty people. Fair Fuel UK, they also have ties to really nasty right-wing groups. Like, Fair Fuel UK is not an organisation to get anywhere near. They should be repudiated at every possible opportunity. So Labour citing them, oh my goodness. Let's go back to the railway for a moment. The ORR are pointing out that the May 2018 timetable collapse is on track for a rerun. Hooray! So, they've sent a letter, a sternly worded letter, to Network Rail and to the DfT, setting out the point that both the West Coast Main Line and East Coast Main Line timetable projects are reaching crucial decision-making points, and lots of things haven't been done. Government has not achieved lots of things, which means that we've got another May 2018 on its way. Hooray! Because that's exactly what happened in May 2018 that caused the timetable collapse. Fantastic. Will it kill off Grant Shapps? Yeah, probably not. Talking of which. So, I think I've been fairly balanced on this, because I know lots of people have worked hard on sorting this out. Some of them very close friends of mine, but a variety of buts. Firstly, what the hell was Shapps doing in the like? People can not take themselves seriously and be in adverts, and it can be charming when they are also good people. Shapps is not good people. He is also, like, you can appear in these sorts of videos where you take the mickey out of yourself if you're doing everything you can to help the industry. But actually, this is frankly a token effort that achieves very little in terms of all of what the industry needs to happen. The rail sale itself is the biggest ticket sale in privatisation history, and actually is interesting for all sorts of reasons. It sets a potentially useful precedent in terms of how it's achieved. A lot of work had to go into doing it, showing how much of a mess the fare system is. Fine. On the flip side of that, Gwyn Topham points out that only about 1% of all journeys taken will benefit from the promotion. It's targeted at intercity travel at quiet times, meaning commuters will just not see really any reduction in fares. Fine. Also fine. It finishes before the holidays, which is also frustrating. There are lots of mixed feelings on this. I was on Radio Leeds, BBC Radio Leeds, talking about it, and I was like, look, it's a good thing, because any reduction in fares is a good thing, and it's worth pointing out that these have been snapped up. These aren't useless. These aren't useless. It's not been a vain attempt, because all of these fares, all of these free fares reduced fares have been snapped up very, very rapidly. So there is clearly a demand for it. Anyway, look on the optimistic side. It's a precedent for more of this to happen. The cynic in me is this is another opportunity for, well, what I've been saying when people have been asking me for a line on this is that Treasury would not have allowed this to happen if it had any meaningful impact on fare revenue. So we'll leave it at that, shall we? Oh, crikey, yes. Not sure how much I can really say about this. Yes, let's see. Yeah, agreed on lots of your thoughts on this. Yes, also, the UK definitely needs a Klima ticket. Absolutely, David Bumstead. Lumo takes a C at the speed of an H. Yes. Again, not sure how much I can say about this other than all of the talk about it being an emergency stop is nonsense. Why? Where on earth did that come from? I'm sure there was an emergency stop, or at least a heated, desperate stop and a very vigorous brake application. But that's not the reason why people have been thrown around in this train. I have not paid much attention to this story, so I don't exactly know how much is public. But it was nothing to do with an emergency stop, I can tell you now. So for those in audio-only mode, you got this in... in fact, everyone, both those seeing and listening, I've given you the hint. I'm not going to say any more as to what happened here. Right, anyway. So, next. Oh, that's interesting. ScotRail have just announced their own half-price sale as well. That's good. Michael C. This comes back to what I was saying about drivers having faith in the infrastructure. Absolutely. What's this story about, Sakura? I'm not going to say any more about it, but do some Googling and you should be able to put two and two together. I'm not going to say much more because I'm too delirious and knackered, and I've been chasing it. Bob's Rail Relics has just absolutely given me the worst earworm he possibly could have. Thanks, Bob's Rail Relics. No, Bob's Rail Relics. Could be a they. Not sure if you are a he, actually. Apologies. Anyway. Yes. Well, I'm very broken at the moment. Submissions and brain empty. So I don't know what is public and what isn't. So I'm not saying any more. Anyway. From that to a rather horrifyingly bleak image, hopefully far away enough that it's not going to cause anyone any upset. But this is we've got to remind ourselves why we're here. We're working our way through quite an unpleasant but a very important subject, and going through the report and picking out what we can. It's already 15:15. Let's see what we can get through in the next 50 minutes. Thanks, Bob's Railway. You are he, him. Lovely. So let's get on with it, shall we? Actually, you know what I need to just double check before I break things is make sure that yes, it is good. Fine. Let's get on with it, shall we? See you on the other side, everyone. As the Intercity 225 fades away, first things first, need to say, what do I need to say? I need to say, I'm not going to sing that song, Bob's Rail Relics, because I think it'll put an earworm into everyone's ears. Secondly, shout out to Peter from Cross Country. Let's go big face briefly. Hello, Peter from Cross Country. Hello, I'm going to be hopping onto your... are there any delays at the moment on the system? I hope that train's probably started. I don't know where it starts from. Chances are... In fact, it definitely will be, because it's probably... what time is it? 1960. It's probably... halfway between Edinburgh and Newcastle right now if it came from that direction. I don't know if it's a Newcastle starter. In any case, I'm hopping on that train to get to Birmingham, so fingers crossed for me. 8:44, hence why I have to jump out of here. It can't be... I was hoping to do a slightly longer one, but I can't do a longer one because I don't have enough time. Anywho, everyone's all fading away. Let's get on with this, shall we? So this is... let's get my little face up. This is a continuation of our Carmont derailment series. So I suppose this is the fourth in the whole series if you include the interim report. But this is the third. The previous one was 2 weeks ago, episode 108. It's continuing to be mistitled. This was supposed to be a single episode page turn, and it's escalated to being a 3-page turn with a summary, right? Let's see if we can get through the report. It's worth it though, because this is not an event that happens regularly, and it's important that I think we focus on everything we can learn out of it. And it's an interesting, I've been picking up and learning interesting things out of looking through, breaking it down in the detail we have and discussing it with you all. It's going through Alnmouth at the moment. 1M00, 1 Mike 00 is currently going through Alnmouth, and Peter is asking if I want it to be delayed. Well, I mean, yeah, no, I don't want to delay it. I just need to make sure I leave in time. So, lots to learn. A reminder, and I'm just going to say it again, content warning that this is going to include descriptions and images from rail crashes. If that's something that is upsetting to you, then that's absolutely fair enough. This episode might not be for you. I think this episode is probably going to be the most unpleasant from this perspective, because we're going to get into some quite vivid descriptions of the damage that happened to the train and the impact that had on the thankfully few people inside that train. So yeah, definitely. So it's going to be, yeah. So we're going to go through, but before we do that, we've got some other bits and pieces within the report that we're going to go through. So as a quick reminder, in fact, yeah, let's just sink straight into the document, shall we? So here it is. This is where we were last time. Going to go full screen again. We're going to start with an issue that's less about crashworthiness and more about a feature of modern trains, or a feature of all trains, really. Certainly more recent trains. Trains of the last sort of 100 years, really, have had lifeguards or similar features fitted. So this is a protection of the front wheel set. HST lifeguards are like a little sort of metal lump. Yeah, you can see them fitted here. This is the lifeguard. Fitted to trains. I'm not sure exactly when they were mandated. I don't know. Was it Pullman that encouraged? I think it was possibly. It was before Pullman. Pullman, 1984, big crash. Beast got underneath the wheels of a train, derailed it horribly between Edinburgh and Glasgow. I think it was before that, though. In any case, Yeah, so the lifeguards, the point being made by here, consideration of other issues. So these are other factors that are here. The HST lifeguards were less robust than those on more modern trains, although a stronger modern lifeguard may have been better able to move sufficient washout debris out the path of the leading wheel set to prevent the derailment. RAIB had sufficient evidence to determine the likelihood of this happening. So this is a bit of a mixed bag. The reality is that there was a lot of material, and a lifeguard being able to shift it out of the way, they don't believe that it was... they can't really confidently say it either way. So, heavy metal brackets fitted immediately in front of the leading wheels of a train. So there's a picture I just showed. You can see there's some. It's mounted onto the front of the leading bogie. There's kind of minimal clearance to the rail to make sure that nothing too big can get underneath the wheel, to minimise the risk of derailment. They're reasonably robust, but there's only so much that you can do with the feature that's mounted onto the bogie like that. It can only be so strong, right? There we are. So there's discussion here about clearance here. The clearance of the lifeguards above rail level on the leading power car could not be measured due to the damage they sustained in the accident. The clearance on the trailing power car was measured by RAIB as 58mm for both lifeguards. The normal and that's kind of halfway within the normal operating range. So that's fine. So this distance here at the bottom here between the top of the rail and the bottom of the lifeguard was 58mm, probably around that much. There's standard, kind of required by modern standards. The one on the HST was designed before the introduction of the 1994 structural requirements for railway vehicles. That, by the way, was the point at which modern crashworthiness features start to be introduced. Before that, it was luck of the draw. After that, trains built after July 90 to comply with the 94 standard, not necessarily built after that date, but to comply with that standard, are substantially more robust than trains built before then. I think we can kind of whiz through this because there's lots of information here that the lifeguards were severely damaged, but probably as a result of the strike of the bridge parapet. So there's a discussion of the depth. Essentially, there's just nothing. You can see the damage here. This is the front of this is what I talked about, the content warning. This is the damage to the front, to the leading bogie. You can see the huge amount of damage that's happened here. The impact, the debris, the damage from the rocks, the shearing, it's just a real mess. And absolutely, the lifeguards have been severely damaged here. So there's no, they just don't have enough evidence. So here's another factor. So we're jumping around a bit here because these are kind of all the sweep up things that are kind of the things that led to the derailment rather than kind of added to it. So, Network Rail's process for the next one is maintenance and inspection of the drain. Network Rail's process for initiating the inspection and maintenance of new drainage works had not been correctly applied. Consequently, it's likely that the upper section of the drainage system, if you remember from last time we talked about drainage a lot, had never been inspected since its completion. Actually, no, we talked about the drainage system in the preceding episode, the first episode of this, didn't we? Although RAIB has found no evidence to suggest that such an inspection would have changed the outcome, this cannot be entirely discounted. Whether or not relevant to the accident, the absence of proper inspection of a safety-critical asset is of great concern. Absolutely. It just had never been inspected at any point since installation. This is a serious problem. Again, I'm going to whiz through this because these are kind of small, limited effects, but I'd recommend you go and have a read through this. It's the fact that it was... there was information stored in Ellipse, which is the infrastructure maintenance database. And survey team visited the area, but only the kind of the drainage near the railway being constructed. They recorded the parts that had already been installed, but they didn't record anything else. In 2020, 2 members of Network Rail staff based at Perth carried out an inspection of drainage assets in the area. This is the first inspection as part of the next programme of drain condition inspections that have been instigated. But it only included the drain below kind of, that lower part, which kind of below the bund and that catch pit 18 there. Because no other assets were actually listed in Ellipse, the inspection team did not and were not required to climb further up the steep gorse-covered slope to seek additional assets. So they didn't find any evidence of washout-related features upslope of that catch pit. that any of the washout-related features upslope of CP18 had resulted in flooding or deposition of debris in the area inspected downslope. When construction was completed, the rest of the drainage system should have been put into ellipse, but it was not, and therefore, this is the because of the asset introduction failure, the failure of the as-builts to be added, and as a result, there was no inspection afterwards, which is obviously a failing. This is related. Then that connects up to the next entry here, which is to do the health and safety file, which is a mandatory. Again, this is a CDM issue. The health and safety file has to be updated. There has to be a health and safety file for every project that Network Rail manages, and particularly in terms of new bits of infrastructure asset. And no such health and safety file existed for the drainage works. That includes as-builts, but it includes other there are other things that the construction design management guidance requires, the legislation requires to be stored within the health and safety file for any particular physical works. CDM regulations. CDM coordinator is a Network Rail employee. In practice, they're always taken by a Network Rail infrastructure project at an organisational level. I think you can read through this, but suffice to say that lack of health and safety file means that it was difficult. That in turn didn't trigger ellipse to get updated properly, which meant that only what was kind of visually inspected by the passing inspection was collected. So they didn't look at they didn't spot that bund that was really the cause of the failure. So the process needed. So RAIB concluded that the process needed to generate as-built drawings could have led to a recognition of the critical differences between the design and the installed drainage system, as we did a couple, 4 episodes ago now. However, even had the health and safety file and associated as-built drawings been captured by Network Rail's record centre, it seems unlikely that this would have led the asset management or maintenance team to identify the risk created by the deficient installation. This is because they would have had no reason to examine the file and drawings until it was necessary to carry out further construction work at that location. Yep, fair point. But it's a wider representation of the fact that the proper processes hadn't been followed and it didn't end up in the asset management database. And RAIB have asked about health and safety files at other locations, so that's presumably then being actioned. The extreme weather action team meetings, these are being considered as well. Customer practice in Scotland's route control meant that extreme weather action team meetings were not always convened when required by Network Rail's processes, and no such meeting was called on the 11th or 12th of August despite forecasts of severe weather. However, even had one of these calls been convened, it's considered unlikely that Network Rail would have taken the actions needed to avoid the accident. So again, I think we can jump through this. We talked a lot about this last time, so 2 episodes ago in this. Gareth Williams, why wouldn't there be a file in this case? Well, it comes back to what we discussed in the first of these episodes, or rather the first looking at the final report, which is the fact that the process just hadn't been followed. None of the end of life, the end of project, if you like, the later grip stages is another way to look at this. If you're within railway parlance, none of the later design, kind of the post-design and post-construction phases really were carried out. Clearly, construction was completed and they moved on without thinking about it. So none of these processes, so health and safety file, as-built, none of them were carried through, and Network Rail didn't appropriately chase to get hold of them. So lots of information here about this, which we're going to skip through, to be honest. There's a discussion here about the number of emergency, the extreme weather calls. You can see not many in 2014 and 15. Peak in 2018. Sorry, I'm yawning because I don't drink enough water and because I talk a lot without breathing. This is a thing I need to learn to do better, which is to stop and breathe. But the thing is, I have to say a lot of words in a very short space of time. Lin Man Fu, all these failures on ellipse flowed from Carillion's failure to hand over properly. Yes, absolutely. The failed handover was a serious. If you want me to spot questions, by the way, make sure to at me in so that my name appears in red. Yes, it helps me to spot questions. So as I say, we'll flick through that. There's not this report. Okay, so there's some discussion here, but I think it's tangential given the conclusion. So that was the kind of the causal factors. Now the underlying factors. We've got a few underlying factors here. So management of extreme rainfall events. Network Rail's management process had not addressed weaknesses in the way it mitigated the consequences of extreme rainfall events. So again, we talked about this last time, but this expands on it in quite a lot of detail. So again, I'm going to jump through these. There's a discussion of the organisation, the awareness of extreme weather events, generally within senior management. Lots of information we can look at. Yeah, this is interesting. So this is an output. This graphic here, it looks a bit like a geological slice, but it's actually an output of the train accident precursor indicator model, showing the rise in risk associated with earthwork failure relative to other precursors. This is what I wrote about in my piece before Carmont happened, and then obviously Carmont happened, which is the fact that, I hadn't seen this data. This was just based on my understanding of what was happening and looking at the data that was more easily publicly accessible. Which, fair, this would have been publicly accessible. I just didn't know about it. This is you can see this light blue here. This bit that I'm hovering my hand over is the bit that's got worse, which is all about earthworks. Everything else relatively either the same or reduced. You can see even level crossings there is thinning out, but earthworks, massive jump there. What else? Network Rail's approach to the management of extreme rainfall events. Yeah, it's capturing that this is an issue. The next one, Network Rail's measures for the management of extreme weather events. Despite an increasing awareness of the threat, Network Rail had not sufficiently recognised that its existing measures did not fully address the risk from extreme rainfall events, such as summer convective storms. Yeah, so and it goes through a lot of features. So the climate adaptation strategy, pointing out here, we actually went through this, didn't we? We went through the previous version of this. So there's some information here in identification of at-risk earthworks, their overall approach to management of earthwork failures due to extreme rainfall, kind of lots of assessment of information here. And again, I'd recommend everyone goes through. I'm not going to read this through in person, but it's worth digging into this sort of middle eight, if you like, that kind of goes through some of the details of this. There's a task force that was Weather Advisory Task Force was chaired by Dame Julia Slingo. And concluded that the weather alert thresholds used operationally to mitigate weather-associated risks and manage safe train operations require a major overhaul. They need to be dynamic in space and time, to be based on multiple predictors, and to reflect the variations in exposure and vulnerability across the network. The task force also reflected on the ability of Network Rail to implement effective measures for the management of weather risk. Weather pervades many aspects of Network Rail's operations beyond daily weather alerts, and with a diverse range of needs. There does not seem to be a central core of expertise, an authoritative voice that can be drawn on to ensure that weather science and data are used correctly and coherently across the organisation. There also seemed to be a lack of coherence on the procurement of expert weather and flooding services, combined with a lack of knowledge of existing external capabilities that could be levered rather than procuring something new. This is a good one. Someone remind me to quote this back to Alex Priestley when he appears on the episode that we'll get him in for, talking about what the Met Office can do for Network Rail. Because that quote there is basically saying rely on the network, work more closely with the Met Office, essentially. Management assurance of Network Rail operational control functions. This is another, these processes. This is RAIB picking out that these processes did not highlight the extent of any areas of weakness in the implementation of extreme weather processes in route controls, or that the controllers lacked the necessary skills and resources to effectively manage complex weather-related situations. Consequently, significant areas of weakness in the railway's risk mitigation measures were not fully addressed. This is a management failure. The problems we've addressed in the previous episode about this ultimately weren't picked up by management. That's essentially what this section is saying. So there's stuff about auditing of control functions, management awareness generally about working practices. And then the last kind of underlying factor here is the broad risk awareness. So the railway industry's risk assessments had clearly signalled that earthwork drainage failure due to extreme rainfall was a significant threat to the safety of the railway. However, they had not clearly identified potential areas of weakness in the existing operational mitigation measures. So again, safety decision-making, the prediction of potential earthwork failures. You can see the number of earthwork failures here steadily climbing. You can see the sort of seasonal cycles there. This is over a fairly short period. Is the rolling average. The rolling average sort of they're not increasing that much, but it's a shame they haven't got the rolling average running into previous eras. I have a sneaking suspicion it's because the data set doesn't exist before January 2006, so there's only so much we can do to really trace this. But it'd be interesting. There's a project out there to actually work out what those failures look like beforehand, in some way that can be made equivalent to the modern way of measuring an earthworks failure. There's lots of data about the frequency of earthworks failures. You can see, in fact, there's lots of good data here to sink your teeth into about earthworks failures and the likelihood of the increasing likelihood of them happening. You can see again the PIM control chart. What was the PIM again? PIM data. That was the likelihood of a overall a predictor. It's basically a predictor data. You can see there's a big jump in the numbers in recent years here. So this is it does not provide any detailed insight as to the various failure modes. Yeah, fine. So I want to jump through this. You can see in recent years there's been a great leap in the number of embankment and cutting failures. So that kind of a great leap in recent years. You can see the failures and storm days plotted against each other, kind of in relation to each other here. So you can sort of see a bit of a comparison. Days with a storm. Yeah. So anyway, sorry. There's some more data about annual rainfall figures and general data. There's a general look at engineering risk analysis, which is certainly relevant for us to look at. They're talking about bow tie methodology for assessing threats, causes and consequences. Preventative, so that's fine. So improving the strength of earthworks and also resolving the kind of mitigating the consequences of a failure as well. So that's the kind of preventative, the proactive and the reactive controls there, if you like. Lots of data there, lots of information there. Corporate learning, another kind of RAIB have picked this out. The fact there's just not been enough corporate learning for Network Rail to mitigate these consequences of the events leading up to Carmont. Lots of events listed off here that could have had similar consequences. So you can see here lots of drainage not meant. The notes are like block drain, drainage failure, more drainage issues, water concentration, water drainage, blocked stream, water concentration. These are all very similar. Oh, that's Carmont at the end there. Lots of very similar lots of similar causes here. So again, this is a very good. There's probably a story in here that I could pull out. In fact, looking at this kind of these middle sections, looking at the interaction of earthworks, weather, and management failures. It's So there's lots of similar events that have happened before that just weren't picked up and learned. It's a really key one. This is why these sorts, it's why discussing this now here is all fine and good, but these sorts of discussions need to be happening across Network Rail. I've not heard enough people talking about the Carmont report actually in safety moments. I need to bring it up in a few. So again, rainfall, earthworks failures. It's looking at this data again, and I think maybe there's worth picking up and maybe discussing. Earthworks versus railways might be an interesting episode. Just pulling out some of this data here because there's quite a bit, and indeed I'm going to roll on through these quite a bit. So we're going to now look at the examination of the consequences of the derailment. So RAIB has considered the following factors in relation to the. I'm conscious it's 22 already. This is definitely going to go longer, isn't it? RAIB has considered the following factors in relation to the consequences of the derailment. Train speed, local topography, proximity to a bridge, the unusually low number of passengers on the train because the accident occurred during COVID, structural damage to the vehicles, cause of injury, crashworthiness, performance of the vehicles, comparison with modern rolling stock, guidance of derailed vehicles, fire, evacuation, emergency egress. So we're going to go through as many of these as we can in what is a very short space of time, frankly. But I have a feeling we might not only get part way through it, actually. I'm trying to think how best to do this. We might have to... Yeah, okay. I should have done this as a 2-hour pre-record, basically, shouldn't we? Gareth Williams is pointing out that getting rid of staff doesn't really help with corporate learning. Absolutely. Vigorously agree with that. Absolutely. The reason I'm hesitating is because I kind of wouldn't mind all of the crashworthiness stuff being in one episode, but then we haven't really covered anything in this episode if we don't if we don't get into it. Let's get through it. Let's see where we get to. So the derailment occurred at a speed of 73 miles an hour. Speed and train mass both affect the amount of kinetic energy that has to be absorbed before vehicles come to rest. Ideally, derailed train should remain upright, run close to its track, thereby avoiding impacts with other trains and infrastructure. This maximises the chances of the train's kinetic energy being absorbed gradually by the train's brakes, and the ploughing of the ballast by derailed wheel sets. Such energy absorption maximises the chances of a safe outcome for those on board. However, in real-world accidents, there are often features of the track, for example curves, points, surrounding topography, for example embankments, and vehicle characteristics which cause derailed vehicles to deviate from the track. The vehicles may then scatter, collide with infrastructure or other vehicles, and roll over, all of which significantly increases the risk of injury to those on board. So it's worth going through and picking out some of these features. I think we might go through some of these, the initial run-up, and then look specifically at crashworthiness. What I'll do is, eventually I'll go back and I'll rename these episodes to kind of discuss what things we've kind of covered in them, so it's a bit easier for people to route find within them. I think that's probably what I'll do. The curvature of the track at the location of the derailment. People are just keeping me up to date with my train in the chat. Thanks everyone. 1 Mike 00 is currently running 4 minutes late. Thank you. So, the curvature of the track at the location of the derailment was a significant factor in the outcome. Once the train had derailed at the washout, the front of the leading power car deviated away from the track to the left. Most of the deviation, around 650 millimeters, was caused by the train running straight ahead along the tangent line as the track curved to the right. A second factor which is likely to have aggravated the deviation was that the cess was an estimated 200 millimeters lower than the top of the sleeper level, which would have tended to roll the leading bogie to the left. A third factor could have been greater ballast drag on the left wheels of the leading bogie, as the right-hand wheels were running over sleepers, tending to yaw the bogie anti-clockwise, so to the left. So that's 3 factors, all helping to pull that train over to one side, towards the parapet. The increasing deviation of the leading bogie from the track, which resulted from a combination of these factors, helped the right-hand wheels to climb over the left-hand rail and put the the right-hand wheels, so the back of the right-hand wheels climbing over the left-hand rail, put the power car on a collision course with the end of the bridge parapet. The train collided with the end of the parapet, with the train's centre line slightly to the right of the parapet centre. The parapet was almost parallel to the track, and the position of the impact meant that it could not guide the power car into the area between the parapet walls. Okay. The collision knocked a substantial amount of masonry from the end of the parapet, and before the bogie ran along the top of the parapet, skimming off the coping, the upper layer of masonry. The force of the collision is likely to have caused the power car to yaw even further to the left and off the bridge. The presence of the bridge meant that once the power car ran onto it, in its laterally displaced attitude, its left-hand wheels were no longer supported, causing the power car to veer off the bridge near its midspan and down to the embankment below. It came to rest on its left-hand side and at an angle with its leading end around 7 metres below track level. The movement of the leading power car to the left is likely to have dragged the leading end of coach D to the left. I'm reading this verbatim because it's kind of important and hopefully useful. Beyond the bridge, other topographical features aggravated the amount of jackknifing and general vehicle scatter. Firstly, the wooded bank rising up the right-hand side of the railway stopped Coach C abruptly after it had run through some trees. This led to Coach C pivoting about its leading end and rotating clockwise as its trailing end was pushed by the rest of the train. Subsequently, this brought it into collision with Coach A and detached bogies, ending its travel by rolling onto its roof on top of Coach D. The motion of Coach C also pushed the leading end of Coach B down the steep embankment to the left-hand side of the railway. So those are some factors in relation to the broad circumstances of the derailment. Low passenger numbers due to COVID pandemic. So the next thing we're going to look at is the fact that COVID was happening, which resulted in a lockdown in the Aberdeen area, in addition to a drop of around 65%. So this is basically saying there's a big drop in passenger numbers at the time. Here is where the cab used to be. If you want an idea of how little protection there is for drivers within the HST power car, this is all that was left of the cab of the train here, and we're going to kind of zoom in and scroll through, I think, to kind of stop the skipping and so you can see what's going on. I wonder if I can. The answer is no, I cannot. If I do this, it's not going to let me scroll piece by piece. Okay, fine. So ScotRail provided an estimate to the RAIB of how many passengers they'd have expected to see on the train in normal times, and it was between 25 and 50 passengers. So that's substantially more than were on the train at the time. There were 6 passengers on the train at the time, I think. 3 staff, 6, or was it 2 staff and 6 and 7? There's 6 passengers and 1 off-duty staff member. It's a substantial number more people who would have been on that train. And so the RAIB are pretty explicit about this. The circumstances of the accident and the resulting movements of the vehicles were such that with normal passenger numbers, the casualty toll would almost certainly have been significantly higher. So this is a critical line that's key for everyone to understand. This is a key point. The reason why there were not more fatalities as a result of this crash was not anything to do with the vehicle. It was entirely because the train was almost empty. It had between 3 and 6 times fewer passengers on board. That's absolutely critical, right? That's key. So now we're going to go through the structural damage to the vehicles and go through these. This will be quite detailed and probably take us through to the end of the episode, actually, which is looking in detail at the damage that happened to each of the vehicles, and then we'll look at sort of summarising the outcomes a bit later on, probably in the next episode, which won't be in 2 episodes' time, it'll be in 3 episodes' time, because we've got the next 2 booked up. So I'm going to go through this again. I'm going to try and avoid reading too much verbatim, but a lot of it basically is written fairly succinctly, so it makes sense for me to just read verbatim. So the front of the leading power car, you can see they're just totally gone. So we're going to go through. As a result of the derailment, the leading power car and all 4 passenger coaches suffered substantial damage. The extent of the damage reduced progressively towards the rear of the train. The trailing power car did not suffer any significant damage, so that's pretty obvious. When the leading power car struck the embankment below the bridge, the driver's cab, which was manufactured from glass fibre reinforced plastic, GRP, broke up and became completely detached. The cab front, windscreen, roof and left-hand side remained attached together and came to rest at the bottom of the embankment slope. The detached cab floor and driver's desk remained close to the leading end of the power car. At the trailing end of the power car, the roof and right-hand body side were severely damaged during the interaction with Coach D on the bridge. The underframe and equipment mounted on it were also severely damaged. You can see that the underframe here, all the equipment is gone. The leading bogie became detached and was buried under the power car when it struck the embankment. The trailing bogie remained attached. Both bogies suffered extensive damage, particularly the leading bogie, which had collided with the bridge parapet. It's just mind-blowing that if you consider what modern crashworthiness structures look like, right, this is just... Tom is asking if there's any crash structure to protect the driver of these trains, or is it just fiberglass? There is, it's worth reiterating, absolutely no crashworthiness structure protecting drivers in HSTs. Absolutely none. It's a flatbed wagon with the engine mounted in the rear and the cab mounted at the front with fiberglass only. That is all it is. So that's why this just completely detached and disintegrated during the collision. It's just absolutely appalling. I know there are going to be drivers watching this right now. I know at least 2 who are watching. It's just appalling. I think it's absolutely right that these... lots of people are like, oh, well, you should be taking all the other trains off the network that are Mark III based. Well, firstly, no, because they have a very different risk profile. So a risk assessment looking at all the other multiple units would conclude that they are quite different vehicles. They behave quite differently. Their couplers are different. But also, it would conclude that the way that the fact the vehicle is much lighter means that they have different energy profiles. Also, the fact that the drivers are generally within a much smaller, less pleasant space, but they are within a kind of the integral body shell of the vehicle, rather than a bathtub that's been flipped on at 45 degrees upside down, 135 degrees, and then taped to the front of the train. It's just appalling. It is shameful. It is shameful the way these are designed. So here's the rear of the leading power car, which you can see has been crushed and smashed to bits. Really heavily damaged. So that's kind of what the rear of the power car, and also this gives us a good view of the couplers, which are absolutely hopeless. You can see this Janny coupler that's just not, it just really is a very weak coupler, this particular design of Janny coupler. The first passenger coach, Coach D, suffered the greatest damage of any passenger vehicle, mainly to the leading half. There was severe damage to the gangway pillars and corner pillars at the leading end of the vehicle, which had sheared off at their attachment to the vehicle underframe, resulting in complete loss of survival space in the leading vestibule. This damage occurred when Coach D overrode the rear of the leading power car just after the power car had impacted the bridge parapet. We'll come to that, if not this episode, when we'll come back to that point later when we talk about coupler strength. Later in the sequence of events, when Coach D rolled over onto its roof, the prior damage to its leading end meant that the integrity of the body shell had been compromised, and this led to a partial collapse of the leading half of the body sides and further significant loss of survival space in that area. The body sides had creased along a line below the windows, and several body side skin panels had split along weld lines. This splitting was also seen on other vehicles which had not been subject to such severe deformation, and is discussed further at paragraph 501. Both bogies became detached, and there was extensive damage to underframe equipment. The collapsed roof and body sides on Coach D also caused substantial disruption to the interior furniture, light fittings and trim panels in the leading half of the vehicle, but the seats and tables remained attached. Okay, fine. Almost all of it, windows in the leading half of the vehicle were broken through, both bogies became detached, and most of the underframe equipment was ripped off. Here is Coach D. We'll get to where people were in the train, Sakara, briefly. So, yeah, Coach D is a leading coach at the time of the accident, Gareth, yeah. So here you can see the train. I mean, they talk about survival space being completely compromised at the leading end, but I have to say, like, they're fairly optimistic about, if you look at the next picture, they're pretty optimistic about survival space. I would not like to be in this, in the train, inside the train, given this total collapse and disintegration of its... You know, look, it's been totally smooshed over. The whole thing has been crushed like a loo roll. Just look at it. It's just absolutely horrific. Yeah, bleak. The second coach, Coach C, sustained damage to the leading vestibule, which had struck trees and the rising bank on the right-hand side of the railway. There was localised penetration damage to the trailing left-hand side, most likely as a result of impacts with detached bogies. Again, we'll come back to that. There was also penetration damage to the trailing right-hand side where Coach A had struck Coach C, leaving a part of Coach A's cant rail, which is a longitudinal structural member running along the vehicle length above the windows, embedded in the side of Coach C. Crikey, what was that? Coach A... Wait a minute. Coach A had struck Coach C, leaving a part of Coach A's cant rail embedded in the side of Coach C, yeah. 4 windows along left trailing side were broken through. The coach retained its survival space, and the interior furniture remained in place, except within a localised area at the trailing end, where the seats had been pushed into the aisle as a result of penetration damage to the left-hand body side. Both bogies became detached, and there was severe damage to underframe equipment. So you can see that the leading end looks pretty good, actually. Survival space pretty well intact. This has been submitted to the sorts of forces that lead people to say Mark IIIs are great, wrongly, because this has survived pretty well. But that's because the forces were much less eccentric, by which I mean they were pretty much like end-on forces for this end. You'd see as soon as there's any sort of eccentric or moment forces or crushing or rollover forces, that survival space is impacted horribly. You can see the damage. That's pretty significant damage to the end of this vehicle here. The third coach, Coach B, suffered sustained substantial damage to the right-hand body side, the roof, which had been holed, and its underframe equipment. Both bogies became detached. There was damage to the leading vestibule and detachment of an internal roof panel in the adjacent toilet, which had dropped but was held up by its secondary restraint. All the windows on the right-hand side and most of those on the left-hand side were broken through. There was no significant loss of survival space. This coach later caught fire, which resulted in most of the vehicle's interior being burnt and the detachment of interior furniture in the trailing two-thirds of the vehicle. That happened kind of after the crash. That's sort of the... that's sort of a key point to point. So I'm going to just... some discussion here, which I think is worth picking up. Adam Evans, do you think, due to how aesthetically modern Class 43s have been through their entire service life leads to people believing it's up to modern standards. Possibly there's certainly aesthetic. I think a lot of the discussion is because these trains feel modern to a lot of people who write about or write rail policy. And so there's a particular belief, and we're going to touch on it. And yes, I'm talking about people who don't watch RailNet anymore as frequently, but did watch it. Did watch it until I did the interim report episode. I'm not going to name names. But those certain people of a certain generation of rail writer are just see these as modern trains, and they do, and they remember all the stories of them performing well in the crashes through the 80s, and performing okay in crashes that seemed extreme through the 90s. Although I'd argue that again, modern trains would have performed better, but there weren't any. The thing with the 90s crashes is, yes, again, modern trains would have performed better, but none really existed. Whereas now, particularly in this instance, an active choice was made. An active choice was made to go for an older train rather than a new train, and as I'll point out, definitely not in this episode. As I pointed out, definitely not in this episode. The cost of choosing a new train versus retaining the HSTs was marginal. Okay, it was an amount, but it was not enough to justify, given the short lifespan of these HSTs versus if they procured a bimode train. Not enough to justify it, I have to say. David Chapman's asking about the risk, about fire risk in electrified trains, removing the risk of train fires. No, as we'll find out shortly, David. Not necessarily, because it wasn't fuel that caused these fires. We'll get to that. So, the fourth coach suffered damage to leading vestibule and localised damage to both body sides. There was no significant loss of survival space. The leading bogie and its pivot became detached, and underframe equipment was severely damaged. Several windows were also shattered, but not broken through. The interior remained intact. The trailing power car did not suffer any significant damage. So, we've got maybe 10 minutes. I'm going to briefly go big face while I just flick through and have a look at what... kind of what's left to kind of go through. Yeah, okay, we are going to go through this. This is a pretty grim way to end the episode, though, I have to say. Let's go back to my small face. Going to do a bit, probably... In fact, you know what? So we're going to start the next episode with causes of injury, and I think that'll be time for us. We'll not have any news. We'll not do any COVID stuff. I think that'll be time for us to cover crashworthiness. We'll see where we get to. I'm not going to make any promises because I'll just break the promises. It's worth us. I just want to take time on this. I don't want to rush. And this section is certainly one I don't want to rush through. So I think what I'm going to do is, this is a short one, and I know that some of you are hoping that I'd cover everything here, but I don't want to rush this, and I think it's right that we continue to... I think the next one will be a longer episode. I'll make a point of making sure that it can be a longer episode, and we'll cover everything in the next episode. We'll close out, we'll summarise, we'll finish everything else in the next episode. I'm going to go big face again and pull us through to the appropriate slide so that I can... Yes. I'm gonna draw it to a close now, I think. Everyone, thanks for watching. I know it's I think ending on the way that people were injured and killed is not. I think that's probably a way for us to frame. I think that's the job to. I think that's how we're going to frame. There are a few more things to discuss, actually. I think there are a couple more points that were made. Let's see. Martha was making a point. Yeah, that the HSTs were justified by survey data. An awful survey, I'll point out. It was a really rubbish survey where people said they liked riding on the trains that run to or from London over the ScotRail Turbostars. Exactly. The fact that those trains had 9 coaches and weren't always rammed, which was clearly absolutely the deciding factor rather than anything about seats. It's just such a bad, awful survey. Just basically used to justify a cost-cutting exercise. I see no other way that it can be justified. People just like a train that doesn't feel rammed. The 170s were always rammed. They were always absolutely rammed. So obviously people wanted to go for a train that wasn't rammed because it had 9 coaches. Absolutely, Martha. Fully agree. let's see. Yes, okay. Any other questions that we can go? We've got a minute or two, right, and do some more questions. Katie's saying that Katie gets the feeling that most politicians qualify modern rolling stock as it has automatic doors, yeah, or isn't steam. Yeah, quite. Any chance for the next discussion that I have an overhead image with car letters showing it, as it's a bit confusing as to where each one ended up? Yeah, that's a good point. I'll maybe, yeah, that's a very good point check, Flaps. I'll try and work out a way to capture that. Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, you're welcome. It is an important topic, and I know this was a short one, and you haven't got the closeout. But I think what I'll do is I'll restructure these. I'll rename the episodes and redo the thumbnails so that they are more of a compact. I'll probably go back to the interim report one, and I'll make these a bit of a proper series so we can kind of capture them. People can find them. Might make a little sort of kind of a playlist for these as well, so people can kind of capture them easily. Well worth us looking through, I think. Yes, right. Let's get rid of my face. As ever, this will be available on all podcasting platforms. Might be a bit of a delay to this one because I'm going to be away until Tuesday, so it might be that this one and the next one end up being uploaded at the same time. But yeah, available on all good podcasting platforms. To support these sorts of things continuing to happen, to support me making these happen. Patreon.com/Gareth Dennis. Where's 1Mike00 got to, by the way? Peter, if you're still watching, hi. You can get the merchandise from Masquette. Please do that. Masquette, also, I sent you. There's a second half to the message I sent you a while back that would be good to get an answer of. PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis is where you can go to chuck loose pennies at me, and GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord for where the chat continues, onwards and onwards. Yes, I think next episode should be an interesting one. We have my fellow Transport Select Committee academic evidence provider, Professor Ian Doherty, is joining us next week, talking about the end of ScotRail's private life, which is, I think, in more ways than one, should be an interesting episode because, of course, we had 25 years of private ScotRail ended. It's now returned to being not private. Here's the pre-private ScotRail branding, which is hopefully not going to be too dissimilar to the future ScotRail branding if they just stick a double arrow on it. Anyway, that's next week's episode. Oh, thanks everyone for watching. I'm now going to leg it to try and catch a train. It was got very dingy, so I was going for natural light. There's natural light rather than illumination for once, which is nice because it's an absolutely beautiful night out there. I've even opened the window in front of me, which I never do. Normally, it's the blind pulled down so that I can see. It is gorgeous outside. So I'm going to have probably quite a nice train journey all the way down to Brum. That's going to be a long one, isn't it? Crikey. Anyway, I need to go and get my train. Everyone's shouting at me to go and get my train. Scotland nationalising buses would be lovely, but unfortunately pretty much all the nationalised private bus companies came from Scotland, and there's a matter of SNP pride that it'll never happen. Souter, et al. Never let it happen. I'd like it to happen, of course. Right. Adios. I need to run. Cheers, everyone. Take good care of yourselves, and do send me your buffers. But there's going to be a bit of a delay because this week's been crazy. But yes, bye, 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 bye.